Okay, so now I want to further explore the implications of the analytic-synthetic distinction of Hume's doctrine that absolutely every proposition fits on exactly one side of the analytic-synthetic distinction. If there's a meaningful proposition out there, it is either analytic or synthetic, but it can't be both. So it's one or the other, but not both. Now, I guess the first thing to do is to ask, what would prove the distinction false? What would prove it false? Can we imagine something or describe something that, an argument that would prove it false, or a thing that would prove it false? What would be the first thing that comes to mind? I've got this claim about absolutely all meaningful propositions. What would prove this? Yes? How would that prove this distinction false?
Because you can't really, Hume would ask, how could you prove it? It was a very tough one to answer. Didn't it mention that in the text?
I say, can you say that again?
It mentioned that Hume was asked to prove the existence of God. Like, it was tough to answer it.
Well, can you prove the existence of a square circle or a cubical gas giant planet? I mean, that would be the thing that my response to that would be, can you prove the existence of God with this system? No. Next question. Right. People want to believe that God exists, or some people do. But if someone comes up and says, I can prove that God exists, Hume might ask, are you talking about a concept or an existing thing? And if they say a concept, what do you say? Well, concepts are not things that are not arguing about concepts can't prove that things exist. And they say, okay, I'm talking about something that exists. Right? They don't. Do they say that God exists, or do they say there are no cubical gods? Right? Analytic propositions are sort of like, there are no of this, or if this is true, then that is true. They're always sort of conditional statements. Right? Is the claims about God like that, or are they claims that God exists? They're claims that God exists, right? So Hume would say, well, you can't prove God's existence with purely analytic reasoning. You have to use synthetic reasoning. You have to have some evidence. Right. So I'm going to back up. I don't know how believing in God or having the idea of God would contradict this. Right. God is something that other people, if you say God exists so this can't work, well, you have to prove that God exists first. Right. So I'm asking, what would, if we could bring something up, if God exists, then his existence is proved by synthetic reasoning. It doesn't contradict the system. What kind of thing would we have to bring forward, to give an example of them, right, would prove this wrong? Well, there are actually two things that could prove it wrong. Oh, cool. Okay, I have to stop lecturing. I've run out of pens. proposition that was squeaky, a proposition that was both analytic and synthetic would prove him wrong. Right. A meaningful proposition that was both analytic and synthetic would prove him wrong, because he says every proposition is one or the other, but not both. When he found one that's both, you prove him wrong. I'm going to have to get a whole bunch more pens. This is annoying. I have like 100 pens.
Do you have a key to another classroom?
Again?
Do you have a key to another classroom?
Yeah, I have a key to the office. I can actually go down and get them. I'll do that in a second, so I want to finish this. All right, I'm going to try and use Phil. And what other kind of proposition, meaningful proposition, would prove him wrong? Yeah, one that was neither. Right. So, a meaningful proposition that was neither analytic nor synthetic would prove Hume wrong, and a meaningful proposition that was both analytic and synthetic would prove Hume wrong. So if you can come up with evidence, right, if you can come up with an example of a proposition that doesn't fit the distinction and yet is meaningful, and the best way to do that is to come up with a proposition that's true, you could prove Hume wrong. And while you're thinking about whether this can be done, I'm going to sneak off and get some more pens.